Hey everyone. So as people are coming and joining, I hope you've had a wonderful day so far. I've appreciated all the good mornings, so thank you. Kicking off my first round of meetings. But I have a screen up today when we were talking about doing a daily prompt. We have about 10 minutes, now about 8 minutes before our speaker joins. Melitza, I want to make sure I have her name right. But this is our prompt for the day. So if you want to think about the impact of stories in your life and a story that has lingered or has affected you or influenced your, your work, write it down. Just take a note. You don't have to write an essay, but this is something that we can talk about later in the day. And especially because given that Digital Playgrounds is about storytelling, you can expand on this, take a brief note as other talks come up, because we're about to have 3 talks back to back. But write this down, think about it, and we're going to talk about it at the end of our day when we have sessions. Also, additionally, Cami and I touched base and got some notes back from Valerie yesterday. And Valerie was really excited about the event. She was also saying that she thought it'd be beneficial if I were to go through a few of your pitch decks for the application and explain. And I can talk a bit more about my background and why it makes sense to do this, but explain how to improve your pitch decks when talking about your work. So we're going to do that as well later today. No need to make any changes, nothing like that. We'll just talk about how to make them stronger.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think we'll have an additional few minutes, so I'm guessing everyone's writing or brainstorming, but also things to keep in mind for this prompt are about how stories have played a role in your life and how you've understood moving through the world, whether that was a video game that you came across as a child or a film or a story that a relative told you, and how that's impacted your worldview, what has stayed with you all these years.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me or not?
Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
This is our lovely speaker, but everyone can take another minute or two to finish up writing. We're doing a quick writing session in the morning.
Okay.
Well, the afternoon for all of them. So good morning to us. All right, I think that we can transition now into the talk. So with that being said, if everyone is ready for our first speaker session of the day, it's with Melitza Zek. I'm so excited to hear her talk. We were actually catching up yesterday in the afternoon. I've worked with her company or worked in relation to her company, New Reality Co., based in New York City, but I've never directly worked with her. So it's really exciting that we get to collaborate here. I know her co-collaborator, Winslow. So I feel so excited to be able to host you for today's talk. Again, she is coming from a background related to storytelling and has some very interesting things in common with some of you and some very interesting ways in which her career has been built in New York City within immersive technologies. She's coming from XR, and I'll let her do, of course, a deeper dive into her introduction. But if anyone does have questions today, again, same thing as yesterday, feel free to write them in the chat box or raise your hand or jump in. We want it to feel like a dialogue and a conversation, and she has so many really cool things that she wants to share. So feel free to engage. Thank you. And I pass it to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dara, for inviting me. And yeah, Winslow couldn't be with us today, the other co-founder. So I'll represent the company. And congrats to all of you. Like Dara introduced me to the program. You guys are participating, and it sounds amazing. And I read your bios. They're all incredible and fascinating in your work. So next time I wish to learn from you, and hopefully I can, share something you don't know, since you already know a lot. So it's a great place where all of you are right now. So having said that, let's share the screen and dive into it. Okay, as we mentioned, we're a new reality company, immersive content studio, based in New York, LA. My background personally is I studied film, and then I worked with the performance artist Marina Abramovich for about 9 years, and worked on a lot of, also besides her, I worked in film, like a lot of social issue documentaries. And then my father is a theater director who brought kind of theater to the streets of Belgrade, where I'm from. So in a way, that background connected with Marina, involving the audience, and then VR giving us possibility to, that audience becomes a protagonist, probably all led me to start working in VR. And Winslow, also his background is in film, but then later on he started moving into interactive media. He studied at ITP NYU, and then he worked on the Clouds documentary. Maybe some of you are familiar. It's a kind of like interactive documentary about creative code. And this is how we met. We both lived in New York. We both just arrived to start our film careers. And this was, I got an internship here. This is like a post-production facility for indie movies called Goldcrest Post. I was an intern, and Winslow was assistant editor. And then we met there and became friends. And like 10 years later, we started a company. So usually we always say to everyone, how to meet people, right? Like I probably didn't expect to meet assistant editor here, right? I wanted to maybe meet some director or something, which I didn't, but you kind of never know where any interaction or meeting with people is gonna bring you. So I just encourage you to try to be in as many places as possible and meet people and nurture those relationships. So that really brings us to our first VR piece called Giant. Giant draws inspiration from me growing up in Serbia during 2 wars, one directed us directly, one indirectly, and knowing that these kind of situations are still ongoing in the world, I realized, why don't we say a story through VR? Because usually when we hear about war in newspapers, we hear about the number of the victims, or maybe some kind of statistics or a political side of the conflict. But maybe we don't know what are those emotions that people are going through when they're, hiding in their shelters, when they're enduring these situations. So what we did when we, kind of had the script with the scriptwriter together, so we realized, okay, we don't have office, so let's start with something. So we applied for this new museum incubator called New Ink. It's based in Soho in New York. It's pretty much, if you see this circled building, it's right next to a new museum. We applied for basically a table there. It's New York, so everything is like cramped. And we just had that script and this kind of idea we're going to make it, but nothing else. We didn't have a team at that time. And I think like when they interviewed us, like, I don't know if you went through the interview process to become part of this program, but we had to sit with the director in the museum, and they're like, you guys seem crazy enough that you might make this into reality. So that's why we're going to let you. So kind of just purely believing our words. So as I said, it was 3 of us. And within really few months, this became our whole team. And that's how the project, as you know, it takes a village to make these kind of projects. So Giant places you in this basement of the family that is hiding from bombs, and they cannot tell a little girl that it's actually war going on. So they tell her that it's a friendly giant that is knocking down the buildings and wants to play with a little girl. So everything kind of, you witness their laughter, like, you know, smiles and good moments and love and happiness, but also fear and tears. And so kind of like something that we can all relate to. And we shot it on a green screen and use game engine environment for this. And this is Winslow, he's showing me something here in this image. So this is pretty much was a regular film team. Had to be like, we kind of combine like regular film with gaming. So we needed to have gaming team and film team, you know, anyone from camera, assistant camera, makeup, wardrobe, and so on.
Which engine did you use? Which game?
Unreal Engine. Okay, and then because we shot it with just like red camera, it's flat 2D. We added a little bit of depth. So the characters are not 3D, but they have a little bit of depth, for which we use something called Depth Kit. So we also had Microsoft Kinect recording them at the same time and merging that information. And this was also then the beginners team, how we started the project with them. As you can see, like Juan, pretty much problem solver, very kind. Jack Aaron, the technical artist, Todd Bryan, Alexander Prodich, and Scott were working on the sound design side. And we, you know, what was interesting, of course, was spatialized audio, because you can position, you know, the bomb blasts coming from wherever direction you want, so it gives a bigger sense of realism. We also used anything at our disposal. We didn't really have much resources to make this project, so we had to be very imaginative. So we bought a Time magazine and created our own cover here. Does this mean war? And then we, you know, like created 3D object out of it and placed it in a basement. So when you're sitting, you can kind of see this news, like what is happening, like giving you a little bit of context, what's going on. And again, with help with people who were sitting, like James here, he was another artist who was part of this viewing program. Another thing, we didn't want to just have like eyes and or ears. We also wanted to have a sense of vibration that you can feel in your body. So what we did, we purchased this IKEA stool. We usually like to joke, it's a $5 IKEA stool, and this bass transducer that is like $45 on Amazon. You know, we asked our friend Hannah, you know, to come with the drill, and this is all again New Ink. We were literally sleeping here. We were almost not going home. You know, until that point when the light turns off, thinking no one is in the room, like after midnight. So that happened very often. So this chair was like, yeah, it produces a vibration when there is a bomb blast in the experience. And this is how it works through the Max. This patch. This is our desk where we created the project. And it's covered with boxes because at that time we traveled to Sundance with the equipment. So we didn't have where to put anything. So we just placed it there. And you can see this post-it note. If we would ever cross or put something on the neighbor's table, we would get a post-it note, please move your stuff towards your area. So yeah, we went to Sundance, and in a way, like, you know, this project was also kind of possible because of Sundance deadline. which probably a lot of you know, if you have a deadline, you make it happen. We knew it is going to premiere on January like 21st. It has to exist. So pretty much it was finished at 4 in the morning of the day of the premiere. And this is how the installation looked. We wanted to have 3 chairs because of the throughput in VR is like a little bit problematic. So we wanted 3 people at the same time. And we wanted to, before you actually go into VR experience, we wanted to, that you're already in a dark room that resembles basement, so that you already start feeling, you know, something. And then you, as you can see, you sit on this chair that I described earlier, you put on the headset, and you kind of transition from that giant on the screen, it becomes giant inside the headset, and that's kind of like, so for us, like, it's important that how we onboard you to the experience. And what happened really with the reactions was what we were hoping that it will. People started coming out of headsets emotional, telling us, I think now I understand what other people are going through, or I also have a child, and I was like constantly projecting my child being in this situation, what I would do. So a lot of these emotional conversations were sparked about war, which usually is not the case. Usually it's more intellectualizing the situation. So that really brought us thinking to, okay, if we as humans destroy, if we as humans can destroy other humans, we don't stop there. We also destroy nature. So let's make a piece about how, like, about something related to climate destruction. And then we thought, okay, there is a lot of wonderful documentaries, right? A lot of wonderful NGOs and organizations who already like taught us about climate. But then something we haven't seen maybe was how, again, how does this problem becomes personal to us? Because VR has that power. And we as humans, we always think that, I think my problem is the biggest problem, right? Like everyone is preoccupied with their own problems. So we're like, okay, let's make deforestation your personal problem by making you into a tree. And then let's see what happens there. Are you gonna understand climate or deforestation in a different way or not? So we, again, dared to embark on this another kind of unknown journey here, really not knowing how is this going to resonate with people. But we, you know, again, couldn't really watch any more news and do nothing about it. So we called the NGO called Rainforest Alliance, and we asked them to, if we can work with their scientists and biologists on, you know, so they can guide us through how to, we didn't want to create like scientific piece. We want to make an art piece that can move you. But we wanted to have certain realism. So we recreated like a region of Peruvian rainforest, and we used in it like real, like actual plants, recreation of plants and animals that would live there. So in this experience, you start as a seed, and then you start piercing through the ground. So before you actually put on the headset, we give you the seed and soil, and we ask you to plant that seed. So when you put the headset, you become that seed. We want to have something tangible while talking about nature. And then you start growing. You soon, this becomes you. Your arms become branches of a tree, and your body becomes trunk of a tree. This is how it looks like when you look down. Trailer. If we have time now to look at it, or what do you think there?
I just dropped a link to the trailer into the chat. Melitza and I decided it'd be easier if all of you quickly click that and take a minute instead of dealing with Zoom and audio. So if we want to just pause here for a second, and then everyone can watch that, and then she'll continue talking.
Okay. And if someone can maybe wave or tell me, or you there, tell me when to continue.
Sure. Also, as a heads up to everyone, I'm saving all the links that our speakers bring up that are shared in the chat. You guys can also share links if there's a project that it reminds you of that you love. You're like, oh, this thing, yes. I'm saving all those links and I'm going to drop them into Discord so that everyone can access them at any time, because we're all here to just inspire each other. Also, not to put him on the spot, but we just had our speaker for the next session come enthusiastically wanting to listen to a bit of this talk, Aaron. So he doesn't have to pop on or say hello, but we have another speaker that just joined and I invited him to come and listen to the rest of your chat, Melissa.
Hi, Aaron.
Okay, I think we can jump back if everyone's seen that clip from the piece.
Okay, just so you guys, again, if we're talking about VR, it's the best way, of course, to experience it, but oops, let me see. Okay, so after you finish, so in this experience, it's kind of incredible to grow as a tree, and you're playing with birds and witnessing this whole nature. But unfortunately, at the end, humans start coming to the rainforest and they start burning it. So you witness that destruction from trees' point of view. And that's why, because when you exit the headset, we pretty much end the experience with devastation, but that was not the intention, just to leave you like that. That's why we give you a gift at the end. This is this envelope, and we put the seed that you became and that you also planted in it. And we ask you to take this seed as a reminder to keep our forest standing. And then you get a QR code on the other side of the Rainforest Alliance that brings you to this page, you know, that can teach you about solutions to deforestation. Because one thing we learned from Rainforest Alliance is that there is hope and there are solutions in place. We just have to learn about it. And again, the team this wouldn't be possible without incredible and a big team as well. So this is how we found actually Jacob Kostinson, an artist. His work was featured on Epic Games Instagram page. They just put a post on it, and then Winslow literally messaged him, can we talk? I mean, within 2 days from that post, he was on our team as the creative director of 3. And then this is Jacob. Then we had, as you can see, other members of this team. And again, this is how the team grew slowly. It was about creating a lot of partnerships. That's how this project happened. And for us, again, it wasn't just about eyes and ears. It was also about, let's see what other senses now we can incorporate. And so we used also these elements. So the first you see this industrial fan, and this is when you feel the breeze in the rainforest. This is the moment when you reach the fullest height, and it's this quiet before storm. This is the moment when people have a smile on their faces, everything is nice, life is perfect, and after that, the fire starts. Then you see a subpack, which is a vibrating backpack. You can feel vibration of a growth of a tree throughout the whole experience on your body. And then also a heater that, of course, turns on at the end when there is a fire. And this is this switch box where we plug in all these 3 elements that I just showed you. So they're kind of, triggered in different points in time in the experience. But another important aspect of tree was scent. We worked with OVG's team, who were at that time part of Sussex University. And really, like, we learned how scent brought such another like dimension to tree. It became that much more real that you are a tree. I mean, as much real we can make you be a tree. So we used 3 different scents. One was when you're underground, you can smell soil. When you're above ground, you can smell the foliage, the rainforest, and then the final scent of a fire at the end of the experience. And the scent has 3 really powerful features that it brings with them. It's related to memories, and a lot of people sometimes when they're underground smelling that soil, they tell us it reminded them of their own childhood when they were playing in the ground, but it triggered some memories. Or some people just keep remembering tree because of that smell. But this effect is typically known as a Proust effect from his book In the Search of Lost Time, when there was a description of Madeleine's scent that took the protagonist back to his grandmother baked cookies. Then we have instincts and behavior, because smells and odors are all around us in any single moment, and these chemicals are informing us of the environment surrounding us. They also say that humans are as good as dogs, really following a path of a smell, as scientists did this research of animal and human following the path of the smell. And at the same way, also smelling someone else's tears unconsciously produces a reduction even in our aggression levels. And emotions as well as a third component of smell. Our first reaction to smell is fight or flight approach, or avoidance, as our Darwinistic reaction to survival. And then the OVG's team also created this incredible software. Actually, think of it as editing or sound software, but this is just for smell. You kind of select your input device. You can select which smell you want or what emotion you want to create by combination of different smells. Then you can program really at what time, which kind of intensity and where do you want to happen according to the participant. As you can see, all these different, this is like the spatial delivery, so on and so forth. And this is how it looks for tree. These are these 3 scents I mentioned, and below this smaller box was dispersing the smell in different moments of the experience. And this is how also some examples. This is at the Tribeca Film Festival. We also like that when you enter the installation, you feel like you're in a rainforest before you put the headset on. And tree was shown at more than 100 maybe festivals or events around the world, and it's always different because we always work with elements that local designers or those event places can provide for tree. But we always try to create some sense of the rainforest, and also sometimes we even have sounds of it, so you start already feeling this before you go into the VR experience. Yeah, this is, for example, in Colombia. So yeah, this is pretty much about the work we did so far as a new reality company.
So there are a few questions, mostly right off the bat for me, but there's one from one of our participants, which was how long did it take from concept to, let's say, the debut to create this?
So kind of both projects, same thing happened with both projects. I would say like, in October or early November, we heard from Sundance that they are accepted to Sundance. And by that time, we only had like a small prototype. And then they would premiere in January, end of January. So I would say like So why is it hard to answer this question is because we kept working on a tree after the premiere assignments. As a matter of fact, like
I think that's normal though. I
Yeah.
think that's very normal. You just kind of keep
Yeah,
going.
that's why it's hard to answer it, because then we just kept working like here and there throughout the time.
Mhm.
But if I would have to look summarize, maybe 6 months. But also, as I mentioned, we hardly slept. We pretty much had 4 hours outside of the office. It was really intense. So it's not like a real normal human's 6 months of normal relaxation after work. Yeah.
You like maybe spent 6 months, but also lost 2 years of your life. Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
you know, compensation.
And I always say, yeah, that we did that probably with these 2 projects. So not that I recommend it, but also it was helpful to make them happen.
So as something else related to this group of participants, I wanted to ask people here, how many of you have collaborated on a larger team for one of your own projects specifically? I'm not talking about client work, because Malit says, you know, when I was talking about everyone yesterday and you read their bios, everyone here is a professional. Everyone's been working for many years perfecting their craft. But sometimes it's for commercial work or it's for other forms of fine art. So that being said, if we can just kind of get a check of how many people have collaborated on their own projects and to what extent those teams were, and you can answer in the chat or just raise your hand, but that's helpful for us to know in figuring out what resources to provide. Okay, it looks like a couple people. So that also being said, if you want to talk a little bit, and you touched on this, about reaching out and building the collaborator network that you and Winslow did to create these projects, because you mentioned Winslow had just reached out the moment he saw someone's work that he liked, and how important that is. I know for a lot of the creative projects I've been on, I'll get a random DM and it's like, hey, can you come on in this capacity? And then you just figure it out, especially if there's budget, of course. But is that how a lot of the teams were created that you've worked on? People just sort of jumping in at random points, or you really like their work, so you ask them to come on?
You know, everyone we met in a totally different way. For example, one of the visual effects teams, the way we met them is because I was speaking on the panel with the founder of that visual effects team. Yeah. You know, and then we spoke together, right? Addressed the audience, and then I asked him, wait, I just realized about your work. So, you know, somehow out of also at New Ink, where we got accepted, definitely that was of incredible help to meet the right people. So we were, yeah, it's helpful to be in this kind of environment, and then you can ask around. You know, I kept asking who works in Unreal Engine, and then someone else introduced me to someone else who was then outside of New Ink. So we just tapped into everyone we knew previously, like one person I know from when I used to work in film from before, and then we literally tapped into everyone we knew or were meeting in that point in time, and kept asking, like, do you know someone, do you know someone, or maybe that person was that someone. So
yeah, and I think that especially looking at New York, everyone is ready to work on the next project. Everyone's always hunting for what that next project is going to be, so there's kind of that environment already built into the city. Melanie had a question. What is your impression of the VR piece by Marshmallow Laserpiece, In the Eyes of the Animal? Have you seen that?
yes, that was the same time as Giant at Sundance. It's beautiful. We, you know, they are friends, and, you know, amazing creators. So I always love everything they do.
That's awesome. Mani appreciates counting in normal human time. I wanted to relay that. He noted that, and I think it's probably relevant. I'm looking at other questions. Something else I wanted to bring up that we talked about briefly. Oh, I'll pause on mine. Now you just brought up concerning financial, at what time did you find funding and when did you begin that process?
Funding happened really once, you need to make a prototype in order to apply for Sundance. But once Sundance says yes, it's easier. I'm not saying easy, but tiny bit easier to get funding, because then you can say, hey, we have a premiere at Sundance, which means a lot to some tech companies, and it also gives people certainty you will do it. And yeah, that's the point. Like after Sundance, for Giant, actually, it was not like that, because Giant was our first project, so it was self-financed, but 3 was, yeah.
So related to that, there are a lot of ways, we also talked about this a bit yesterday, but there are a lot of ways to find funding, specifically in the US. There's a lot of foundations. There's some private groups of investors who are really excited about investing in new emerging art technology and like creative tech. But also a lot of people go to tech companies. So they'll seek out funding from Snapchat or Facebook right now, like through Oculus. Where have you found the most success? Has it been through private investors? Has it been through tech companies? Has it been through festivals?
So it was a mix of all, in a way. We did get certain sponsorship from tech companies whose software or hardware we used, but also they are all about innovation and looking into future. So if you can use their tools in the way to showcase their capabilities, that's great. It's a win-win. Then we also got money from grants, and then also from few private donors, but really like no one, it wasn't like it wasn't money from VC or anything like that, because there was no return on investment. Like the only return we were hoping for is to touch the audiences, and kind of it was more of an impact in terms of what are they getting in return. But so that was the route for, because we also know the way the 3 was envisioned was very complicated to set up, to scale, to show. It requires so many people, so much equipment. It was not easily monetizable project. So that's why we just decided to go this route.
I'm laughing because, as you know, I've installed Tree in an exhibition. That when I said earlier that I've worked with Milica's company, but we've never worked together, I produced an exhibition that involved Tree, and it is very complicated and very beautiful. But this actually brings up a great point about set design. And in my own work, and feel free to follow up and ask me questions about this later over Discord for any of our participants. I've done set design for XR before, and something I really appreciate about New Reality Co. is that you emphasize the importance of transporting your audience into your XR or immersive world before they ever put the headset on. And you want them to stay in it by giving them haptic feedback, having sensory experiences. Tree is an amazing award-winning example of trying to tap into as many senses as possible. And as we close out your session, I would love for you to speak a bit about the significance of really considering physical presence when designing for digital worlds.
Well, yeah, it was really all about that. We had to convince you that you're a 3 no matter what. So really to make this happen, like even when we were choosing a fan to simulate the wind, we would bring, I don't know, 10, 15 different fans to test it out. And then of course return to the ones that we didn't want. And that's how we would find the right brand, the right model. It took a lot of prototyping and testing, and then smell, like, oh, this doesn't work. And at the end, even like for the smell for burning, the lab did make the smell burning, but it didn't work as much as like using just a simple match, because that was the most realistic burning of the forest. So constantly iterating, prototyping, and pushing it to the place where it feels the way you want it to feel. For us, it was supposed to be realistic 3. again as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We have about another minute or two. Does anyone else have final questions or follow-ups or anything like that? Yeah, Anton.
Hi, thanks a lot for sharing your experience. I've had quite a similar experience actually with an installation, an AR installation that also went to Sundance and was exhausting in the last months of work, and we toured in museums after. And I'm wondering how you can go into production without having the support of a major institution like a museum or something, you know, in advance, and how do you showcase your work, or how do you try to, at which point can you go? Because for me, it's really hard to say, okay, we're going to produce that, and after we're going to try to make people to see the piece in a festival. It's really better to put people, you know, up front as soon as possible to see the potential and to have like commissions basically, because it's a lot of money. I'm wondering what's your feedback on that, and would you still work the same way, you know, on a new project basically?
It's a great question, and luckily all of you are, I think, in better situation than artists in the United States, because government funding is so amazing. In France, we have like Atlas V is our friend, so we kind of were in touch with a lot of production companies there, and even wanting to apply for some VR grants. So you have that amazing opportunity just like this, and in the United States, you don't have that. So we had to find these creative ways. No one told us how to find this. No one pointed us where to look for it. We had to like invent that path on our own. And of course, it was a harder path to do it like up. You know, what you're suggesting is much better. And for me, moving forward, that's how I'm doing it from now on. But I think you kind of also need to get to the certain point that people do see your work, and when you can have that opportunity then to do it properly. So it seems like, and congratulations on Sundance, I actually read also your bias, so that's huge. So it seems like you already are built up for the next project to be done properly for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky because there is no such scene, you know, that exists today, and a lot of people are interested into that, you know, from museum curators, or people don't have the knowledge, the network, you know, there are a lot of barriers and like symbolic walls between all these disciplines, and it's hard to get people into that scene. So I'm wondering if now there are like networks, you know, of curators or of museums that have like common programs, maybe to support some for touring, some installations, is it developing in that sense in the US now, or is it really just super new and nobody knows where it's going?
It's still very new, kind of like Facebook Meta is now speeding this whole industry up for all of us. Before it was like millions of individuals pushing, but now where Meta says, let's talk about this, now everybody's talking about this. So in a way that could help speed up things. And what you're asking, this is what we did, what Winslow and I did after we made 3. We became that entity that was making possible to show 3. We didn't hire anyone externally. I mean, of course, Dara would help once we already were booked for the event. So but we had to on our own to find events, or usually we were approached by different events. So I am not sure. I know there's some VR. Maybe there you know more about what is right now in New York, like VR venues and places, but I don't have right now an answer. This whole industry feels still like you are building a plane while flying the plane. It's like that for all of us. So unfortunately, we all need to wear many hats and think about solutions that no one ever figured out before. So that's where we are. It's not an easy industry, but it is exciting industry. So
yeah, I would say, and we're gonna have to close up this talk, but I think that dialogue between the two of you just now is super relevant is when you all come to New York, we will take you to places like Onyx, which is a studio that's been funded by a European organization in Greece to open up a whole mixed reality laboratory and kind of space for showcases, and it's a workshop, and hopefully we'll be able to work there as well. So there are places in New York and Los Angeles, and we'll hear from Erin momentarily about the LA scene, that are fostering this within the US. But to Melitza's point as well, it really is something you have to carve out for yourself here, because it's not as government supported, it's more privately supported. But New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco are the 3 places to be in the United States if you want to be having these conversations in significant ways. There are other little pockets throughout the US, like in Austin. And I would say if you go up even into North America, Canada, you know, like Montreal has a huge game industry and they're having those conversations. But for the most part, New York and LA are the places to be in North America if you're trying to get in front of the right people who can write you those checks and empower you to find success in this industry, gaming or XR. And all that being said, thank you. Any last closing words, Melitza?
Yeah, I think I don't know the plan where you will take them, but Onyx, we are right now currently members there.
Oh, great.
Those are the great places. But again, no one of them has, you could kind of make little connections and start spreading. No one has like a map, as we are all creating this map, a roadmap for moving in this space together at this moment.
Yeah, I found it to be an incredibly friendly industry in the US where people are really trying to help each other and figure it out. So yeah, so hopefully we might see you at Onyx. That'll be fun. I'm in touch to schedule time there. So yeah, thank you so much for today. This is wonderful. You can also stay and hear from Erin. He's about to jump on in just a second. But whatever works, thank you again for presenting your work and for being here. And if anyone else has follow-up questions, I can, of course, funnel those back to Melitza. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and
Thank you.
good luck with all your amazing projects.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. So now immediately jumping into Erin to keep up the energy of these 2 talks, going to the other coast of the United States. I'll let you do a deeper dive into your intro and your bio, but I'm really excited that Erin agreed to come on for these talks. This is our first time collaborating, and we met only a few months ago, and I was really blown away by his background and working across these different industries. And with that being said, I'll give it to you to jump in.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I love Tree. That's such a beautiful experience. It was nice to catch some of that. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know if that's working. And then of course everything moved on my other screen, so I'll have to try to see your faces there somewhere. Is that working?
Yes,
Great.
it's working.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. I'll try to go as quickly as possible so we can get to some questions. But it's been 25 plus years, depending on how you count. So there's a bunch to run through. If I can click here, there we go. So overall, I'm an interactive entertainment creative leader with over 25 years experience. And I've served in design, engineering, and production roles at a bunch of big companies like Disney, Sony, Activision, 2-Bit Circus, and Madison Square Garden Entertainment. You'll see Madison Square Garden when you're in New York. And also some smaller companies that I'll talk about. And I'm focused on AR, VR, and XR, location-based entertainment, currently doing a lot of Web3 blockchain gaming, and always interested in interactive storytelling. So it's really exciting to be here with creators doing cool things. So I started in VR actually in 1990 at the Human Interface Technology Lab at the University of Washington. I was working on AI and robotics, getting in the electrical engineering department, then moved to computer science. And Dr. Tom Furness showed up and gave a talk that blew me away. And I jumped into his lab to try VR. That's actually the first time I was putting a VR headset on in that picture. And I was just decided that that's what I needed to do with my life. So I went to work in the HIT lab as a research associate after volunteering for a bit for free. And Dr. Tom Furness was a pretty amazing advisor. He just received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the AIXR a couple weeks ago, and he set up the Virtual World Society. But he actually came from the Air Force. He was working on heads-up displays for fighter jets. But he decided to leave the Air Force, and what he liked to say a lot is that he wanted to beat his sword into a plowshare and bring the technology from the military to make the world a better place. And that's what the Virtual World Society is all about. And he used to ask the question all the time, what kind of world do you want? And it encouraged us to build that world. After I got my master's degree, I went to Walt Disney Imagineering, and I worked in the virtual reality studio as my first job. And I was working as a show designer and a programmer on a multiplayer interactive branching narrative VR experience called Aladdin's Magic Carpet Ride. We launched it at Disney Quest in 1998 with custom HMDs that we built. And it was a really interesting experience because we built so many different prototypes that we even tested at Disneyland, did testing at Disney World before we launched the main game. And some of those were quite long. They were very exploratory. We wanted to put people inside this movie and let them explore. But for throughput reasons, it had to be shortened. So it went through a lot of iterations until finally we came up with what ended up being about a 5-minute experience. But there were branching paths that were triggered by player choices, and you were there together with multiple players in one experience, which was a lot of fun to work on. We also built other attractions for Disney Quest. We did Hercules in the Underworld, which was an immersive projection theater or a cave-like experience. And then that was replaced with a Pirates of the Caribbean ride that's in that picture below. And on the side, I was getting really interested in massively multiplayer games. I had been playing MUDs for many years, and the graphical adventure games that were coming out, like EverQuest, I thought were great, but weren't super kid-friendly. So I actually pitched building an MMO at Disney. I left before it launched, but it ended up launching as Disney's Toontown, which was a fun project to prototype. From Disney, I went to Sony, and Sony had a division called Sony Development that was all ex-Imagineers. And so the teams that had been building theme parks were built up inside of Sony first to build the Sony style stores, which went on to inspire the Apple stores and Microsoft stores. Actually, the same teams that designed those designed the Sony style store. And then we built Metreon in San Francisco. And we actually worked with the graphic novelist Jean-Giraud Mobius, who made the Airtight Garage graphic novel. We took that and used it as the theming for the arcade. He was actually the art director for the space, as well as the art director for the games. So like he designed that motion simulator pod down on the left. And I was first brought on to build a 30-player first-person motion simulator game on the surface of an asteroid that Jean-Giraud had designed. And it was sort of virtual bumper cars with guns is how I like to refer to it. We also built a 32-player game that had physical themed elements in the space. And one of my favorite things with that, when we actually took this to Tokyo, we actually built it out so that if one of the teams lost, their big glowing orb would turn off and the entire arcade would go a little bit dark and thunder and lightning would roll through the whole place. So you could tell when something big happened in the game, it actually affected everybody in the entire arcade. Super fun project to experiment with. Tokyo was a larger version of Metreon, and so we had a lot of the same attractions that we had in San Francisco, but then we also added some new ones like the Beatles Yellow Submarine adventure, which was designed by some of the same people that designed the Star Tours ride vehicle. So it was a 30-seat motion simulator immersive projection theater, actually had portals along the sides with projectors, big projection screen up front. These are the only pictures I could find that was actually under construction, so it hadn't been quite completed yet. And there was also a virtual actor or a virtual puppet playing Captain Fred from the Yellow Submarine, who was remote operated by a person in a little control booth. And it was a lot of fun to see them training that person in Japanese. That's not how I'm used to hearing the Yellow Submarine. But it was a fantastic experience. We also built a game called Hyperbole that was in the arcade. And we had these bowling lanes that were set up with a real bowling ball that was used as a trackball. So we actually built this ball cradle that had a cushion of air that levitated the ball so that it could spin freely. And you would bowl through the streets of San Francisco or through this Roman Colosseum. And you'd sit on real bowling chairs, drink beers, and have hamburgers and play games with your friends. But then we actually took that game home and made a home version of that, which we collaborated with Microsoft. At the same time as spinning out the company from Sony. Sony decided not to build any more buildings. And so we went into the themed entertainment business as Hyper Entertainment, with Hyperbole as our first product, both as an arcade product and a home game. I then went to the traditional games business because the location-based entertainment business crashed. After 9/11 and the dot-com bubble burst, things changed and people weren't building theme parks or arcades for a while. And I got into that business through art outsourcing. We had tried to do some outsourcing when I was working at Sony, and frankly, it didn't work very well. We didn't know what we were doing. But we actually built those motion simulators. That was an outsourced project. And I watched what the engineers were doing and how they set that process up and replicated that for art production. And first I was doing that with a startup called Vicarian, which was working with Chinese art studios and US game developers and helping them to provide art for those games. So we worked on a Lord of the Rings game. We actually did promotional pieces for E3 for a God of War launch and a few other games, and learned a whole lot about that process. And actually, it's funny that the way that job happened was actually bumping into a friend that I'd worked with at Sony at E3 in a line to get our badges. And he told me about the company. I told him it was crazy. And he said, I know. And they actually asked me to come on and help them figure out this process, which we did. And then went to THQ and did the same thing. We set up a central outsourcing group for THQ, worked on some of those games, and then did the same thing at Vivendi Games and worked on a whole bunch of games, including these pictured here. And one of the things that I learned through that whole process is that art outsourcing takes a lot of prep. It takes a lot of getting specifications right. And it's really hard to do one thing. If you want to outsource just a piece of art, it's a whole lot of work. But if you want to outsource 100 pieces, that's actually a lot easier, because once you get through that first one, get the communication pipeline set up, it runs really smoothly, or it can run really smoothly if you do it right. And so it's important to kind of find that threshold of, is there enough artwork or whatever work you're outsourcing to justify it? And actually, at this same time when I was working at THQ, I started speaking at conferences. And I found that, you know, that in the last discussion, talking about how the importance of meeting people through these events and finding collaborators or even finding jobs, a lot of that can come out of conferences. And I found that I started speaking at Game Developers Conference and an IGDA event, and found that that was a great way to both meet people, but also to build long-standing connections with like-minded people that you might want to collaborate with. And a lot of opportunities have opened up that way. It also just feels good and is mentally beneficial to put your thoughts down on paper and present them. It actually helps a lot to really synthesize what you've learned, and then sharing that with the community. People appreciate it and know what you're up to and know what you're interested in, and then we'll reach out to you. And I found that much easier than trying to seek people out. If you can put yourself out there and say, this is what I'm into, this is what I've done, this is what I've learned, this is what I need, then those things can sort of happen organically. And so I definitely encourage participating in these organizations for these conferences, but also some of these organizations, and I'll talk about it in a bit, I'm a member of, and that's been really beneficial to keep those conversations going outside of the conferences. From Vivendi Games got acquired by Activision. So I was merged into Activision, but I changed roles. And there I was director of production overseeing licensed properties, building console games, essentially. And these were all based on licensed IP, or not all. We did some original games, but most of them were, this is just a small sampling. I actually worked on about a dozen console games a year while I was at Activision. But each of them had a very targeted audience that they were shooting for. And I really had to dive into the mindset of players for Madagascar or Barbie or Hot Wheels or NASCAR or Apache. We're all very different audiences that had different interests in terms of gameplay. Had to sometimes ignore the reviewers because reviewers are not Barbie demographics. They're game reviewers that are more used to reviewing Call of Duty, and focus on what do players actually want and what would make the best game for them. But one of the things that we didn't do there was work on a lot of mobile games. I actually only did 2 mobile games during my time at Activision. And it turned out they weren't going to do any mobile games because it makes more sense for a company like Activision to just acquire somebody that already does that, rather than have the team internally learn how to do it. And eventually, later on, they actually did acquire King.com. But at this point, they hadn't. And so I left. And I started my own company doing game production for mobile games called Rabix, and then opened a studio in China called Metal Rabbit Games. And the studio in China, I then tasked with making this game first, which was Weather Rabbit, because a lot of the Chinese studios that I'd worked with were just cloning games. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to build a team that was founded around the idea of innovation. And so we built this Weather Rabbit, was a mixture of a weather app and a virtual pet. And so the premise was very simple. If you dress the rabbit appropriately for the weather, it's happy and you earn coins that you can use to buy more clothes. If you don't, the rabbit is sad and you don't earn any coins, and you feel bad because the poor rabbit is looking either too hot or too cold. After we built that game, we then started working on a suite of games all around a single IP. So it was the Summon Smash monsters that we first built for connected televisions. We built a monster fighting game with I'd like to think very high quality graphics. We won an award from Unity, and then we built an idle clicker using the same characters on mobile, and then we built a VR game called Smash VR with Google Cardboard was just coming out at that time, and we're really just trying to experiment to see what was happening in the market, what would make the most sense, as well as trying to make the highest quality games we could with limited budgets. We actually self-funded until we were able to raise money in China. I found it very difficult to raise money to build a studio in the United States, which is why I went there and raised venture capital in China. We also started working when VR came back. We started working with Nani de la Peña on some of her projects, which are immersive journalism projects, starting with Project Syria, where we recreated a scene from a YouTube video where a bomb went off while this girl was singing, which was a devastating piece to watch, and even more devastating to experience. We actually, the team at Metal Rabbit Games, built the city streets so that you could be in that space. Another one we built was from crime scene photos. So we built these very realistic scenes for Nani's projects, which were really impactful and helped the team sort of get their feet wet. And then I skipped ahead to this accidentally, but here it is. We then started working on educational VR projects when the Vive came out. This one is a chemistry educational project targeted for China. At the same time, Google announced the Tango, and I picked one up just to experiment with and see what it could do. And a friend of mine, Cyrus, was in Shanghai at the time, and I used to, when I would go out and visit, we would just kind of kick around ideas, and we decided to enter a contest that Google had announced, and we built Ghostly Mansion. And Ghostly Mansion uses the device you can sort of see in that video as you're walking around the room. It's a hidden object game, but you have to physically walk around your space, look under things, and move in order to walk in the game. There's no teleport, there's no walk button. You have to physically walk. And this allowed us to wrap our heads around what was possible with these kinds of spatial computing devices. Google Tango was later killed off by Google and launched as ARCore, and we got accepted into an app incubator based on that to build that app out. We then went on to work on HoloLens. Again, same thing. He and I just bought HoloLenses and started playing with them, and we entered a hackathon and won with this project Behemoth, which that monster is coincidental on the television, but there is a monster breaking through the walls of your house. So we scanned the room that you're in, we locate the ceiling, and then start breaking through the ceiling with this creature that you've got to defend yourself from. It was really just early experimentation to understand what was possible with this technology. And one of the things I get asked a lot is did you figure out what experience you wanted to make and then make it, or did you look at the technology and decide what to make based on what it could do? And the answer is both, and it's an iterative process. In these cases, we wanted to win contests, so we started with the technology and said, what can it do? What does it do really well? What do they want to showcase from it? And let's build to that. And actually, those constraints are really helpful because it helps you to focus, so you're not just wandering about and doing anything. But then the experience design is super important to make something that is meaningful for the people using it. And so we tend to bounce back and forth between those two, and it kind of doesn't matter where we start. We can either start with this set of constraints from the technology, or we can start with this is the experience we want to build, now let's choose the technology. But even once you do that, whatever technology you choose is going to have new limitations that then you need to iterate back and forth on. After building some of that, I went to work at 2-Bit Circus. 2-Bit Circus had been doing consulting, building projects for other people, but they wanted to build a micro amusement park. And so Brent Bushnell hired me to be head of attractions, and we built, I was responsible for all the entertainment for this park. We built this and launched it in 2018. We had a 100-person interactive theater, robotic bartender, custom arcade games, midway games, all sorts of things, including a whole bunch of VR. So we had seated VR, standing VR, free roam VR. Some things we built ourselves, like the motion platforms for the seated experience with joysticks in the armrest. Others we collaborated with third parties like Hologate or Birdly or Starbreeze with the raft. But then in the case of the raft there on the lower left, we themed out the whole space in order to provide the right context for the experience. And that was one of the story rooms. And story rooms were my favorite part of 2-Bit Circus. Space Squad in space was going onto the deck of a spaceship, no VR in that case, but there's screens, buttons, switches, knobs. People have to learn how to fly a spaceship and go to another planet and deliver a package. And the story rooms, and we also built a real physical escape room called the Lost City. And for me, those were all about story crafting versus storytelling, that it's all about creating a context where people can have experiences that generate stories. And so it's never quite the same twice, particularly in Space Squad, depending on what roles people take, how they play, the experience can be very different from one group to the next, and it's replayable. In the case of Space Squad, you can go and do it again and again, and depending on who you're with, it's going to play out very differently. And I think that's a really exciting space to explore. After 2-Bit Circus, I went from a micro amusement park to a massive dome. I worked on the MSG Sphere project, which was originally planned to open in 2021, but unfortunately, due to COVID, has been pushed out to 2023. It's an 18,000 seat arena being built in Las Vegas. You can see it under construction there, with 25 megabits per second of bandwidth per seat. It's got a 15,000 square meter LED dome, about 160,000 square feet, the size of 40 IMAX screens, and 170,000 speakers to create a beamforming audio system. And I was designing interactive experiences. We built prototypes and did R&D on what would be fun for people to play in that space. If they're not just watching a movie, what could they do? Super fun project to work on. So currently, these are the things I'm doing. So I'm the co-chair of the VR/AR Association. Like I mentioned, I like to be active in these groups because it gives reason to talk to lots of interesting people. I'm also the chair of the AIXR LBE advisory group, which is a little bit more European focused than the VR/ARA, which is very global. I know that AIXR would like to be very global too. I'm also a member of the Producers New Media Council, and I advise a couple of companies. I'm featured collaborator with Spatial Activations, founded by the founder of Meow Wolf, and I consult for a bunch of people that I can't talk about. And I've been consulting for Amber Labs, and just to give you a sneak peek, actually next week, I'm starting a new job as a program director for Amber Labs, which does AR and VR and Web3 experiences and all kinds of emerging tech stuff. I'm also, in my spare time, I work on the creator program for the Snap AR Spectacles, just for fun. So I have a pair of these AR glasses and have been experimenting with what's possible to do with these, which is not quite as powerful as HoloLens, but pretty amazing for a lightweight device. And using Lens Studio is similar but different than using Unity. Also spent a lot of time over the last year in AltSpace, a lot of time on Zoom, of course, but AltSpace for meetings like some of the LBE advisory meetings we had in AltSpace, which was nice to be able to gather together with people. And I've worked on some events there as well. And I just wanted to point to these two articles that I wrote for AIXR. One is about, well, they're companion pieces. The first is sort of a history of the headsets that have been used for location-based entertainment over the years, starting in 1991 all the way until this year. And some of those actually have features that we sorely need now and don't exist in current headsets. And like the Disney Quest HMD had a hygienic headpiece that you put on before you put on the headset, so that could actually be taken off between guests and cleaned. And the guests never actually touched, or their face never touched the headset itself. Dreamcraft Dreamset created a similar thing in 2019, but it hasn't gotten wide adoption. And then the second piece, I go through all the current headsets and looking ahead to some of the ones coming out and evaluating them based on their appropriateness, specifically for out-of-home use for location-based entertainment, which has sort of stringent requirements. And I'm also consulting on blockchain gaming, which working with this company now, CryptoSteam, or project, I should say, in the Web3 space, which is a play-to-earn NFT-based DeFi game, experimenting with trying to build a sustainable economy in a play-to-earn game, which is a super interesting space to explore. And I would just say for all of you, you're in the right place. The games industry itself is over a $2 billion a year industry, and that's just PC, console, and mobile, not counting the VR space. And in general, I would say AR has got a lot more opportunities than VR. It's really a superset of what's possible with VR, and the space is growing fast, but VR is still an interesting space. And just sort of calling back to a couple things that I mentioned earlier, these emerging platforms, like when the Tango came out, or when HoloLens comes out, or when the Snap AR glasses come out, that's a real opportunity for small teams to make a name for yourselves, because you can learn before others do what the pros and cons of those devices are and how to use them. And that becomes really valuable very quickly. And it's something that large companies often have a hard time pivoting, but small groups can move a lot faster. And so that's definitely an opportunity that I would encourage you, try the latest stuff that you think has potential. I don't try all the latest devices, just the ones I think are cool. And that includes Web3, which I think is super high risk. It's a risky space, but very interesting, high potential space to explore. And I'll have to make a plug that out-of-home entertainment is bouncing back in 2022. I'm really looking forward to seeing more out-of-home experiences once it's safe to do so due to COVID. So that's me. I know I talked really fast, but I still didn't leave a lot of time for questions. Let me know if there is any time for questions. Otherwise, feel free to follow up with me later.
Thank you so much for this. And yes, we actually, the next thing in our schedule would be a 20-minute break. So I'm happy to use that time for some Q&A. And we also started your session a bit later. We were finishing Melitza's. So this was wonderful. Thank you so much on going deep into your vision of mixed reality and gaming, what it was originally as it's transformed and what you see for the future, and some of your predictions associated with what's coming up, what are good trends to focus on. There's one question so far from Melanie in the chat that I'll bring up, and then I have a few as well. Do you think going toward VR is risky? I think that's a great question to ask right now, because there's a lot of attention on AR and there's a lot of funding being thrown at AR versus VR at the moment in the US.
So is VR risky? I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Like if you're trying to make a home game, for example, that's risky because it's very hard. Discoverability is very poor. There aren't a lot of channels. You can either go to the Oculus App Store, you can do side quest or use App Lab, but that's even harder to get noticed. And the Oculus App Store, it's very hard to get noticed there. Going onto Steam is hard to get noticed. There's so many new applications coming out all the time. And so if you're going to try to make a home VR experience, then you've got to figure out your marketing strategy early, because it's going to take a lot to break through the noise in order to get your project noticed. If you're working on an out-of-home experience, then that's different. Then you control the space, and frankly, it doesn't matter then, is it AR or VR, as long as it's the experience that you're looking to deliver. Whoops, that's make that thing stop. And so that would be my question is are you thinking home experiences or out of home experiences for VR?
I'm not thinking about something out of home experience, because in my point of view and my experience for VR as a VR user and creator, I don't feel comfortable using VR outside of my home, because I feel like it's such an intimate experience as it's so immersive. Also, I'm sorry, I'm talking about my project here. Sorry for the others, but if you want to, I'm taking every opportunity to ask questions anyway. So yeah, I was thinking about the PlayStation Store, maybe hoping on the PS5 that is supposed to launch a VR headset as well. So yeah, I was thinking about actually a horror game, but not much as many VR horror experiences that focus mainly on the jump scare effects, just being boo. This works really well in VR, but trying something much more like psychological horror, like Silent Hill for home. Do you think it's doomed, or do you think there is a hope?
I don't think it's doomed, for sure. I think there's definitely an opportunity there, and there are a lot of PlayStation VR headsets, and rumor has it they're going to release the PlayStation VR 2 next year or so. Yeah. And so I think there will definitely be players. It would be worthwhile to try to find publishing help, to find a publisher that can help you with that marketing component. Now, if you can't and you can afford to finish the game and get it out there may still be value in doing that. But without a marketing push, it's hard to get a return on your investment. Now, there's still going to be a ton learned from doing something like that, even if it doesn't end up being a huge commercial success. And so I wouldn't discourage you from doing that if you can afford it. But if you can find a publishing partner that believes in your vision, they look at your prototype, they like what you're doing, and can take that to the next level in terms of getting support behind it, it's definitely worthwhile. Finding funding and finding publishing for VR titles can be tough, but it's not impossible.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Something else I wanted to bring up in relation to your talk, Erin, talking about demographic research. For many of our participants that are in this program, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I don't think anyone is trying to compete with a major game studio or necessarily get their game purchased by a major game studio. Am I incorrect about that? Their experience? I think that these are more art-based, and I think that they're a lot more personal, or they're personal reflections of experiences. That being said, though, how important do you think it is to do demographic research when designing something that you know is supposed to be playable or have an interactive component, especially if it is a game? Some people here are doing art experiences solely.
I think it is important to understand who are you making this game for. That's an absolutely critical or experience, even if it's not a game.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that can be, I'm making this for myself, and people like me, and that's okay. That there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that you can make a really amazing personal experience that may in fact find resonance with a lot of other people that have a connection to that. But even if that's true, it's worthwhile to go through that process of identifying who that user, that target or expected user is, and leaning into making sure that you're providing the right affordances for that type of person. Now, in terms of demographics, I generally don't spend a lot of time thinking about gender or race. It's more about play styles and level of skill and ability. Like, are you making something for people that have never done VR before and they need to be eased into it? Are you making something for people that are experienced? Are you making things for young people or older people? That sort of part of the demographics, I think, is more important. And understanding, like, what other skills do they already have that you can leverage? Like, if you're targeting something that happens to overlap with a lot of gamers, boy, that makes things easy in terms of interfaces, that you can rely on a lot of common game interfaces. Like, even teleporting is something that people that play VR games, they totally get it. They go, okay, here's the teleport mechanic. If you put that in front of somebody that's never done VR before, now you've got to educate them and help them with that onboarding process. So that I think is the important part of that audience identification. And there might be, depending on the experience, there might be a reason to focus on other aspects of demographics like race or age or gender. But I generally find it's most beneficial to really understand what their level of experience and expectation coming into the experience, so you know where you need to tutorialize or guide people.
Thank you for that. And I could not agree more personally. Knowing that we are now close to time, are there any final thoughts, Aaron, or any final questions or comments from our participants before we go on a short break? Wonderful. So I'm going to share. Oh, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks a lot for all this. I'm trying to develop a more indie, large scale AR installation. And I would like to know your insight about what you think of the business model that could be developed in order to fund and to produce such a project. Do you think that we should absolutely have in mind for touring this kind of project, the income that could be made by the audience, actually? Should that be part of the equation, or should we, in the US at least, from your experience, look more into partners or commissioners?
I think you should look at the potential revenue stream for sure. And even if you do have partners, that's one of the things they're likely to care about. So you'll need to start thinking about that for sure. In terms of when to start that process, it really depends. You want to build as much as you can in order to show where it is you're going with it. And for an AR installation, what I love about AR installations is you control the environment. And so it's great for AR because all of the limitations and problems that you can have in different spaces when you're trying to design AR experiences for home, you can overcome in out of home. You can control the lighting. You can say, don't put that shiny surface over there, all that kind of good stuff. And so I love AR out of home experiences. It can be helpful to figure out, like, where are you going to do this first? Where you obviously festivals are a great way to get word out, but in terms of getting paying customers to show up, partnering with a location to do a trial can be really beneficial. A place like 2-Bit Circus has things called beta nights where they bring in things for free for people to try, but then they'll often pick things, or the way we used to do it when I was there, we would then take some of those experiences and launch them as paid experiences after the beta night. But there are other locations, like in New York City, there's things like VR World, there's spaces that might be an appropriate place to partner, or Art Tech House in New York is a cool space that does various installations. And so finding a space like that you can go into and start that process as a trial before figuring out, am I gonna do this as a touring show, or am I going to do this as sort of a franchise setup that's replicated in multiple cities? There's so many different avenues that you can go, and depending on how broadly you want to roll it out, you may need a whole lot more funding. But if you're trying to do one location and use it as a place to experiment and learn from, then maybe, yes, you definitely want to factor in that. But if you've got rent to pay and everything else, that money goes quickly. And so you may not be able to fund the actual development of the project from the revenue that comes in from guests. That may be covering a lot of your overhead, which is one of the benefits of being part of a larger space where that overhead can be amortized across multiple projects, and you're not having to pay 100% of the staff, 100% of the rent for the floor space. But yeah, that's just.
Yeah. Thanks.
I look forward to seeing what you build.
Yeah.
This is such an amazing group. I look forward to seeing what you're all going to do. I loved reading through the bios and brief project descriptions. I'm excited to see what you all do.
Yeah, thank you so much for today. And it's really generous that you shared your contact information. And I will share that out in the Discord that we have for this group. Thank you, Aaron. This was wonderful.
My pleasure.
Learning more about your background. It was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Enjoy your break and the rest of the program.
Thank you. Thanks for waking up.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. I think right now we can do a 15-minute break, and then we'll go into one more session. Tying it back to the prompt from earlier today about stories that matter to you, stories that have influenced you, thinking about the ways in which our speakers have referenced the stories they chose to tell in certain types of technology or media and visuals, and ways in which they would interact and engage with their users or their players. And this will come up later. Also, maybe right before we go on this break, as I said this morning, or the beginning of today, I will go through all of your different proposal decks this week at the end of the day. Is there anyone that would want me to dig in first for their project deck so we can start talking about how to make them stronger by the time you come to New York City? Everyone has done art school, right? This is like art crit.
Faranaz, maybe you can do it if you want.
Cami jumping in to just pick someone. Nice.
Yeah, because we were discussing about it before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you want me to begin to speak about how I'm sorry, I'm so shy. Every time I speak, this is the work we write
at the beginning.
At the beginning.
No, Dara, she wants to help on your pitch deck. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can review. She can review it at the end of the session if she wants.
It was so yesterday, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we got that feedback from Valerie, who oversees Cami and myself, and she was saying that she thought it'd be really beneficial for everyone if we could go through your proposal decks and start talking about ways in which to make it stronger when you arrive in New York, because of course you will have about 2 months before you come to the US. And by the time you arrive, what can you work on so you can pitch to potential American partners, collaborators, funders? So we want to help you. And it is something I professionally do. I work as a marketing strategist as well for different teams, both in XR and gaming. And I will help them on their marketing strategy for social media, for publicity, for press releases, and also for seeking funding and how to talk about the work that you're doing. So I will go through slide by slide and talk about where to make each of your decks stronger, and what you can work on. Of course, knowing that you applied for a program and that maybe it would be a different deck should you applied for a meeting in front of an investor, but we can work on this together. So at the end of each day, we can go through 1 or 2 of your decks and discuss what you could work on and certain slides, like having timelines. So if it, you know, whomever wants to go first, it's not so much of a criticism, it's just ways in which you can add to the deck. The ones that you presented yesterday.
Actually, I have a quick question because I have 2 sets of decks. I'm sorry, but I have the one that I showed yesterday, and then I have another one which is very detailed with a lot of writing. And so I was wondering, are you really meaning like whatever, you know, slides for a presentation that we would do like a pitch, or is it more like the actual complete description of the project, which has more, you know, text in it?
It would be more about pitching. So these would be the decks that, you know, going back to Melitza's presentation today, when she was reaching out to new collaborators or asking, you know, throughout her community, who can I work with on audio? Who can I work with on volumetric capture? What information are you sharing with them to get them to understand the scope of the work, what their work would be, those expectations, your roadmap, you know, when certain things have to happen by, how will you involve them? So working with you all on that, and knowing that some of you have successfully done that before and have presented at festivals and sought funding, and others of you maybe have not done that. So knowing that this group of people, again, all professionals, but of different points in your successes with your own art endeavors. So wanting to meet you all where you're at and knowing that you all have different needs as artists and wanting to respect that. And the more you let us know, you know, oh, I've already done that before versus this is my first time experiencing this, that's really helpful for us. But yes, and also I know in this role, I'm curating and hosting the program, but I am a professional writer as a journalist and a script writer. And as I said, I'm a strategist and a director. So I frequently work with teams to make sure that their work is polished and cohesive, whether they are marketing it or they are prototyping. So feel free to lean on me with any questions about your work. I can help do that. And I've worked with many international teams to make it digestible and palatable for the United States. Well, wonderful. Our next speaker just jumped on, but we're going to take still a quick break. Hey, Eve. Oh, she's connected. Hey, Eve. She will. Well, her talk doesn't start for 8 minutes, so I'll write her a quick note.
Hello.
Hey, I was going to say, no, you're good. Thank you for joining. We were going to take a very quick break because our last session went a little over and we were all just discussing some logistics.
Oh, great.
So feel free to break for like 10 minutes and we'll all come back.
Perfect. I'll see you then.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. And if anyone has a question, feel free to write in the chat, but I'm going to go get more coffee.
Yeah. And I let the session open, so you can come back whenever you want.
if anyone's out there, we'll be starting again soon. Who are we missing?
Okay. I'll get my video on momentarily.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, thank you so much
Hi.
for joining us.
Hi.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, this is Eve. She's also based out in the West Coast. So she works in Los Angeles, and she's a writer first and foremost, but also specifically has been doing a lot of really cool stuff in XR with 360 technology. Has anyone here used 360? Are we getting, I'm not sure. I kind of saw yes. Okay, we at least have one person. I think 360 is really interesting. I've actually not worked with it a ton myself, so it feels like this magical mystery tech for me and the ways in which you tell stories with it. And Eve's going to talk about that a bit today. But she's a woman that just has so many accolades, so many cool things going on. We've known each other for a couple of years and sort of just been around each other in different circles in mixed reality in the US. So I'm really excited that you were available today and that you want to give a talk on your work. And with that, I will hand it to you to give a deeper bio, but know that I'm very pumped for this. Thank you.
Well, awesome. No, I am too. I'm really excited. These are, I will talk a little bit about my, hold on, let me get my screen sharing up and then I'll really launch it. Because I did prepare a little presentation for you guys. So yeah, I'm really excited too. I will talk a little bit about my work in 360 and XR generally, and then I will talk a lot about how that applies to you guys. I've been looking over your projects and they sound amazing, and you're all very experienced in the variety of fields that pertain to this medium. And so my hope is that I might be able to give you some tools that you can use as you move forward. And so I was excited to give this talk to you because it's an opportunity to kind of talk through the things that I've been thinking a lot about and teaching a lot about. So I am historically a television comedy writer. I started my creative career. I had a career prior to TV, but I started my creative career working in American television sitcoms, writing for shows like Will and Grace and Disney Channel's Wizards of Waverly Place. And you know, I didn't necessarily know where I was headed, but I picked up a lot of amazing tools in that space that have been super helpful as I come into the XR space. I'm also an award-winning journalist and writer-director of the first 360 virtual reality sitcom. And these days I am also an author. I will tell you a little bit about the book that I wrote that just came out. I'm a professor. I teach television writing, the virtual reality filmmaking, and immersive storytelling for Los Angeles Film School, Emerson College, and Chapman University. And I'm also a consultant available to work with storytellers and brands and companies and that sort of thing. So yeah, and then let's see. Hold on, and then you guys are in Europe, so I will say I have spent time in France, but I've not done much work there. But I had the pleasure of spending a summer in Italy, and actually a lot of my 360 work that has been licensed was stuff that was shot either in the UK or in Israel abroad, or so it's, you know, I think that's been a lot of the use cases of 360, which is sort of interesting, is like travel videos, right? They want to transport someone to somewhere they can't easily visit, which makes a lot of sense. I also feel like the reason that it's been slanting that way is because travel is just place and you don't necessarily need a story. I think my feeling is even travel videos are better with a story, but you can kind of justify doing it without the story. And the reason that people are trying to figure out how to use this technology without the story is because they don't know how to tell stories in this medium. It's really challenging to a lot of people because it's different than the flat screens that we've gotten used to, you know, for the past several years. So basically, I was working in television comedy when I learned about virtual reality. And I thought, well, what if instead of just watching the TV show Friends or The Office, you could be in it, sitting inside Friends' Central Perk Coffee House or in Dunder Mifflin at a desk next to Jim. I feel like these shows have international appeal. Am I correct that by using these references, it's something you guys are familiar with, or at least have heard of? There's some nodding. Okay, but hopefully the visuals help.
Yes.
So that's basically what I asked myself when I learned about virtual reality, and I thought it sounded pretty cool. And so therefore, like, I took the knowledge I had from working in sitcoms for like a decade and applied that to a 360 environment. So basically what I created is a workplace comedy that takes place in a co-working space where you are a member. So I'm not gonna dwell too much on this, but I want to give you a little bit of an overview of my work just so that you then understand you know, the context of what I'm talking about, and then I'll be able to use that as an example for how we can develop stories in this space going forward. So here's just a trailer, because it's always fun to watch a short video.
Hey, what is this place?
It's the Biz Nest. It's a co-working facility.
Bougie. It's bitchy. It's woke up scandalous, walked out fabulous. I love it.
I'm looking for the manager.
Great. If you find her, keep her away from me.
As members of a co-working space, we share the same printers, drink the same coffee, but do our own work.
Posted a re-render to the website, and I just need you to take a look and let me know if I can post a social.
This is one of our members filling out their paperwork. It's very simple. You just have to remember to put a valid credit card.
Who's got $5 for free enterprise pupusas in the American dream?
I'm telling you, Mike is the anonymous cooper.
How about you? Huh?
I am not equipped to be selling pants.
I don't even have an idea for my novel.
And you can see
Next to my
it's
agent, I have pages to
sort
read
of
by Friday. I am pitching a story to Wired Magazine. You can have a expired visa. Can be your audience.
Fantastic. Like this. Okay, great. We need a fourth, so stay there. It was the Beijing Olympics, and we felt huge because the Chinese people were so far away.
Rebecca designed these pants to be really flattering if you were on your period.
Hey, Mike.
Something in your teeth. My computer. My phone. Just add it.
I want you to film me watching. For Instagram, people love to watch people watching.
Don't hesitate to ask any questions.
Where is Rebecca? Do I look at my teeth?
Look any closer. Yeah, I'll find out.
I have good news. That is amazing.
You hear me? It's a free tax seminar. I'm going to be doing it right at the tables over there.
Chair. I need your help, please.
So,
Tori, are you watching porn?
Watching porn? I'm watching myself roll.
Okay, so that gives you just a little sense of what I'll be referring to as an example of immersive content.
Hey, what is this place?
Oh,
It's the
we're not gonna
business.
watch it again.
It's a
That's just
business. It's a
I can't get out of the slide. Okay. Next, there we go. Okay, so basically I use this as an example because it did a few things that sort of paved the way for narrative in immersive environments going forward, whether that's 360, whether that's game engine built VR, or whether honestly that's real life immersive experiences. So basically the business puts the viewer's experience first. It embraces the fact that there are 360 degrees, that you can use the space all around you, not just within the frame. And it established artistic conventions for immersive storytellers. So I'll just talk a little bit about what this means, putting the viewer's experience first. So we can ask ourselves, when they put on a headset, why are they in VR? More specifically, why are they in this story? And then why are they in this physical location? And then I have a more detailed presentation where I go through each one of these thoroughly, but we're just doing an overview.
You need to figure out the LL
for today. Okay. And then this is
Membership also.
This is just a scene, but you guys saw the trailer, so we're good. All right. And then, as I said, it embraces that there are 360 degrees. And the idea here is in my case, it was an outgrowth of the multi-camera sitcom structure. But if you think about it for any of our projects, right, normally if you're telling a story, you've got 90 degrees or maybe 60 degrees. But when you're working in an immersive space, you literally have 4 times or 6 times as much space to fill. And so whereas sitcoms on television have like multiple storylines. You might, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this or not, they're called A, B, and C stories. But if you're watching a show like Friends, for example, Rachel has something going on this week, but so does Monica, right? They each have their own storyline. And so based on that philosophy, I was able to use that idea of multiple storylines happening simultaneously, but do it functionally in a different way. So that same concept though, of like, there's more space, so there can literally be more going on. So now this is the part that really, really applies to you. So this is, I'll talk a little bit about what to think about as a writer when you're contemplating narrative in an immersive space. And I read through your project descriptions, and I feel like so often as creators and as writers, we want to tell people what we're doing, right? Oh, this is what I'm going to do. This is the project I want to make. And so what I encourage, with my students in this sort of philosophy of writing for immersive narrative is stop thinking about what you're doing, or don't stop thinking about it. Obviously, you're going to keep thinking about it, but see if you can reframe it so that it's not about what you're doing, and it's about showing an understanding of the experience you're creating. And there are a few questions you can ask yourself to really get at the heart of that. One is, why are you doing it? What do you hope to achieve by telling this story? Secondly, ask yourself what the audience will be feeling. What do you want them to be feeling? And then thirdly, focus on what's the story. What is the actual, who is the central character? What do they want? And what do they do to go after it? And so, this idea that like the answers to these questions include both emotion and experience. And I think experience is a big part of the difference between telling stories in immersive and telling stories in a flat screen. And so to get at the heart of this, there are some tools I like to use. One is an experience summary, and another is an experiential viewpoint expression. And I will go into greater detail on both of those as I move forward. So basically, an experience summary kind of gets the heart of what the experience is for your viewer or audience. So here's an example, and this is sort of why I wanted to give you a little bit of context for my show, is because then I can kind of give you an example of these tools in the context of that. One of the book that I will have coming out next year will have like formats for, sort of fill in the blank type formats for these tools. But right now I'll just give you a sample. So for example, an experience summary for the business is a participant puts on the Oculus Go or other VR headset like a Quest, and they are transported to the business co-working space where they are able to look around, taking in their desk and coworkers. As the participants' fellow businessers approach with questions, problems, and commentary, the experience creates a level of engagement that lets the participant feel a part of this community. The comedic experience ends, leaving the participant with a feeling of happiness and a desire to spend more time with these charming, quirky characters. And so hopefully you see how this is an effective tool to communicate your objective. And it's different than, say, if I just told you like, oh, told you what I'm doing, right? Oh, I'm creating a sitcom that's in VR and there are characters walking around and it's photo real and it's video and, you know, and there are going to be multiple stories, right? Like this gives you something different that while that other statement I just rambled off is true, it doesn't quite capture in the same way. Okay, so that's the experience summary or XSUM. And then the next thing that I mentioned that is a great tool is the experiential viewpoint expression or the EVE. And this is based on the taxonomy of immersive point of view, which I created and presented at Augmented World Expo 3 years ago now. And it's also been published in this book with a very, very long title that I can never be bothered to remember. But the idea here, and well, I think, let's see, where's my slide? I have a slide that will walk you through it. So I will read the experiential viewpoint expression for the business, and then I will kind of share with you what goes into each part of it. And the idea here is that I would find myself at like cocktail parties at these VR conferences, and somebody would come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, what's your project? And it would go into this game of like 20 questions where it's like, oh, is it 360 or is it VR? Can you move in the space or not? Are you a character or not? And it's like a fun game to play for a while, but it gets tiresome. And I was like, okay, can we boil this down to like 5 words? Like, can I get this idea across more efficiently? So for the business, I can tell you that it's an embodied first-person narrative, first-person visual, entity mortal experience. And I know right now that means absolutely nothing to you. And you're like, how is that helpful? But when we're adopting new language, it takes a while to get people on board. And there was a time, I'm trying to guess ages here, but I feel like you guys are all of the age that maybe you remember a world where we didn't talk about hashtags. And when you first heard it, you're like, hashtag, what's hashtag? That's weird. But you know, as things evolve, we develop new language to talk about it. And once it gets adopted, it becomes commonplace and everyone kind of gets on board with it. I feel like there was a microcosm of this in college. I don't know if you've had that experience where there's like a local language or slang and you're like that, you get there and you're like, that sounds stupid. And then a few years later, you're like, yes, senior, and you're totally rambling it off to the freshmen and you're like, okay. So that's just how language works. So anyway, these are terms that can be really helpful. And here's how it works. So this is a chart that lays out the taxonomy and the various points of view. And right now it's a jumble and I'm going to go through each one individually. And then I can't remember if I copied this at the end, but I can jump back to this slide and show you. But the basic concept is you guys are probably already familiar with first, second, and third person narrative point of view as we use it in books, right? So you know that if you read Ready Player One, Wade Watts says like, I, Wade Watts, am going into VR, right? He uses words like I, me, and my, and he's telling his story. So that's first person narrative point of view. If you ever read Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid, you might remember that those books say, you do this, you walk down the hallway, you don't know what door to open. You can choose the one on the right or the left. That second person narrative point of view. And then books like Harry Potter are told in the third person narrative point of view using words like he, she, they. And then we can also use that vocabulary to talk about video games, right? The most common that everyone is familiar with is a first person shooter, right? That's where first person comes from. It's the visual point of view. And then we have TV shows like The Office where they break the fourth wall and talk to the camera. That's second person visual point of view. And most movies, like here's an example, Wonder Woman, are filmed in the third person visual point of view. So we have words to talk about that, right? But then we get to XR and there's more. There's more you can do. You're like, well, how do I tell somebody if I can affect the story or not, right? Like, how can I explain if I can affect my experience of the story or not? So I just realized that we needed more words because we had additional points of view. And so I added a few things. But before I added, I want to say the interesting thing about immersive is that there's a relationship between narrative and visual point of view. And this is something I go into in greater detail in one of my talks. And so if you're interested in that, I can refer you, but I will just gloss over it now. But this idea that sometimes, for example, you might have voiceover narration. And if that voiceover narration matches the point of view of the visual point of view of your character, as in Notes on Blindness, then you feel like you're that person. You're like, oh, I'm the guy. Like, I'm the guy who's going blind because I'm hearing his thoughts in my head and I'm seeing what he's describing. I'm him. But what's weird is even though most of the time virtual reality is first person visual point of view, sometimes there's a disconnect and you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, it's not matching up. So in this 52 Places to Go Iceland, you hear the voiceover of this girl that you're seeing. She's like, I'm really looking forward to having him as my companion. But you know that you're not meant to be her because you see her in front of you. And so the first example in Notes on Blindness is embodied. And the second example is disembodied. And so these are the kinds of choices you can make as a creator. And sometimes, I think you guys seem fairly experienced, but when people are just first introduced to this medium, they don't even know there's options. They think of one thing, one use case, and then they do that all the time. And so even just talking about using the taxonomy as a menu of options can be really helpful because it lays out all the things you can do, all the ways you can tell a story. And then you can choose which method of telling the story is most effective for your goals as a storyteller. So yeah, I'm not sure if you guys have seen, these are not, I hope that my example, the way I described it is enough to give you the sense of it. Although if you haven't seen Notes on Blindness, I encourage it. And I will also mention at the end something called the Look Club, which can tell you where to find some of these experiences. So now we get to the part that I was talking about before, where we needed more words, right? There are different types of points of view that you have. So one of them is effectual point of view. An effectual point of view speaks to how you can affect the story or scene, right? That's something that you generally can't do in television or in a book. Although Choose Your Own Adventure is an exception. So there are basically three effectual points of view. The first is non-entity. And I like to say that's like being an invisible fly on the wall, right? No one can see you or tell that you're there. And you can't have any impact on the story or scene, right? You can't make any active choices and no one even knows you're there. The next level up is entity. And that means you're there and people in the story or scene can see you. And so just by virtue of you being there, even if you can't make any active choices, probably like no character is going to walk right through you, right? And so in that sense, just by being present, you're having an impact on the story or scene. And then the last effectual point of view is participant, which means that you can have an active impact on the story or scene. So something like Beat Saber is a really clear example of that. But it's also true in narrative. If you've seen the VR experience Wolves in the Walls, right? You can place the jam jars on the shelf. You can use the sword to like try to kill the wolves. And you can affect the story or scene in that way. So that's participant effectual point of view. And then the other way that you can have an impact is you can actually affect your own experience, right? You can impact how you experience the story or scene. And I will start with deity because I think that makes it the most clear, is it's possible in an XR experience to get to choose who you experience the story as, right? You could literally be in the body of a different character. So there's a VR experience called U-Turn where they do this, where like, if you turn one direction, you're like a girl who works at a startup company. And if you turn this way, you're like a guy who works at the startup. And so that's so interesting because in real life, you can't ever choose what body you're experiencing life from. So it's a new level of affecting your own experience that we don't have as humans on Earth, and therefore I've called it deity. And there are other ways besides deciding whose body you're inhabiting, like traveling through time, or flying as a human, right? It's sort of, you're breaking the laws of the physical universe. And when you can impact your experience in that way, it's deity experiential point of view. Mortal is basically when you can impact your experience to the degree to which you can on Earth, right? Like, you have 0 to 6 degrees of freedom. You can walk around the space. You can, turn your head, those sorts of things. And robot experiential point of view means you have less control over your experience than you do as a human. The filmmaker has made decisions for you. So a really simple example of that is any VR experience where you feel like you're moving or walking, but you're not doing anything to propel yourself forward, right? So it's like the filmmaker is controlling you. You have less control over your movements or experience than usual. So, okay. And then I mentioned earlier the Look Club. So the Look Club is an entry point into immersive narrative with a 1-2 punch of being a next level IMDb meets TV guide for immersive content, meaning you can search it to find out where to watch stuff, which is useful because otherwise it can be really hard. Even somebody refers a show to you, you're like, okay, but what headsets is it available on? Which apps in which headsets is it? It's like a whole ordeal to find a show. And so we're trying to simplify that. And then it also has a Siskel and Ebert for VR style review show with kind of a Tina Fey sensibility. So like fun, but informative. And so if you're interested in this stuff, if you find the taxonomy helpful, you can watch these episodes and it kind of uses the taxonomy in context to kind of get you used to it. But it also, each episode examines a different VR piece. So there's one, for example, dedicated to notes on blindness. And it talks specifically about how the filmmakers made the choices about the taxonomic point of view, right? About immersive point of view and how those choices did or didn't support their story. So you can start to understand, like, if I want the viewer to have this kind of experience, okay, well then will making it entity support that experience or be counterproductive, right? Those kinds of things. And it can be found online at thelook.club. And then what else? So this is a screenshot of the website, just so you can see what it looks like. And it's searchable by all the things that you would expect it to be searchable by, right? Genre, director, but also by XR type, by platform or operating system, and by the taxonomic classifications, which you can't search that way anywhere else. And then here's a clip, but I'm going to hold off on the clip for now because if there's demand later, we can come back, but I want to really make sure we leave time for Q&A. And I know I'm trying to cover a lot here.
This can be confusing because this episode has Russian dolls of narratives.
Okay, well, that gives you a sense of the tone. It's like, we didn't want it to be academic and feel stuffy. It's like, it's supposed to be really fun, but it's really also packed with a lot of information. I couldn't help but apply my sitcom writing skills to it. So there are little jokes and like songs written in. And then, okay, the next thing. So we've talked about how it's helpful to have an experience summary, the XSUM, and how it's helpful to write a experiential viewpoint expression, right? Those were sort of our first two tools. And the next tool that I like is a story premise line. And so we've spoken to the immersive experience that the viewer, like the just general experience of a participant can have with the experience summary. And then we've spoken to the immersive point of view with the EVE. And then now we have the story premise, which really gets at the heart of the narrative. So for the business, it's when science writer Kate dissuades the coworkers from loaning Tim money for lunch, Tim launches a crowdfunding campaign to circumnavigate Tim's meddling, but then Tim discovers that he can't get cash from the crowdfunding site today. Tim manages to earn a free lunch from the pupuseria next door, but when he learns oh, this is a spoiler. I'm not even going to read the rest, but basically I focus on this first part. Like you can write all the way to the end of the story, but but I feel like it's actually that first sentence up to today that's really key, because that gives you the inciting incident. I don't know if you're familiar with like movie speak, but it gives you the thing that like kicks off the story, the why today. Why is this happening today of all days? It's that science writer Kate dissuades everybody else from loaning Tim money for lunch, right? If she hadn't done that, he wouldn't have needed to do crowdfunding. And then that next part of the sentence tells us what the central character does to go after what they want, right? He launches a crowdfunding campaign. And then it tells us the complication, which is that unexpected thing that happens and turns the story in a new direction. Tim discovers that he can't get cash today. So then he has to do something else, which is our second act. So anyway, I know this is dense and a lot, and basically what I'm doing is giving you a preview of what's going to be in my next book. But when I was talking with Dara, she seemed to think that these tools and being exposed to these ideas could be really helpful to you in developing your ideas. So I wanted to give you a sneak peek. But again, like there's something I will elaborate on in the future. This is actually my current book. And it follows the slide on the story premise line, because basically I interviewed 10 people working in storytelling in sort of cutting edge fields where they're using storytelling in like new platforms and emerging media. And so if it's something you're interested, it could be really just fascinating. I mean, I found it fascinating, and these are all people I know and work with, and I still learned a ton from listening to them. But there's like an executive from Bose who's focused on immersive narrative there, and like Bose is an audio company, right? So he talks about spatial audio and how they're using immersive audio for narrative. And then there's an executive from Netflix that talks about interactive narrative and what they're doing at Netflix. And then there are independent creators too, like the woman who created Escape Room in a Box. And so all of these folks talk about how they use the principles of storytelling, right, that they learned while studying traditional storytelling, and how they apply those principles to these new and emerging platforms. So that could be really useful, or if not useful, just a fun read. I left every interview super excited. Great. And so, so those are 3 tools I've given you so far. And the 4th tool is McGonagall's Elements of Game. I don't know if you've read Reality is Broken, but it's a great book. And I know a lot of you are working on games based on what I've read about your work. And she did something that I thought was really brilliant. She broke down the basic components of game. Like sometimes people think it has to have a win-loss condition, it has to have a leaderboard, but according to her research, and this seems to really hold true in a fascinating way, what something needs to be a game is a goal, which is something that the player wants to achieve, right? Rules, which are restrictions in how you can achieve that goal. Feedback, where the game lets you know whether you're getting closer to that goal or not. And then voluntary participation, right? If a boss tells you to do it, it's work. But if you choose to do work, it's a game. And so if you have those 4 things, you have a game. And I think that's really useful. And one of the things that I'm pushing for in my work and in my teaching, and I will be encouraging in my book, is to use elements of game and story in a lot of XR experiences going forward. But again, depending on the goal, on your personal goal, not the goal of the game. Like, what's your objective for the experience? What experience do you want your audience member or participant to have, and how do you want them to feel during and after that experience? Great. Okay, good. We made it to the end. This is the slide with my contact information. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. You can, follow me, but you can also reach out to me if you have questions. I know I covered a lot really quickly, and I'm going to take some time to answer your questions now. But, feel free to find me in these places and contact me if you have follow-up questions, because I'm happy to help. I'm very passionate about making sure that the stories that we tell in these new media are high quality and purposeful. And, I think one of the things about XR is that we are creating experiences, and we as humans, we process experiences different than we process things we watch on a flat screen. And I think sometimes people forget that. Like, I remember my first experience of doing social virtual reality. I went into alt space. And how many of you guys, maybe I'll turn this off and so I can see hands. You can raise real or virtual hands. How many of you have been in alt space? Two. How many of you have you been in social virtual reality generally, whether it's Rec Room or VR chat? Okay, so some of you have, some of you haven't. The ones who haven't, if you have an opportunity, go in. It's super interesting. It surprised me. It was one of the early things I did in VR. But the big thing was, like, if I watched The Simpsons, I like remember a scene from The Simpsons. I'm like, oh yeah, I watched that. And what was interesting about AltSpace was, yes, it was an animated environment. And I had a conversation with an animated person. Like, I was in LA, they were in New York, but it was live in real time. And when I left the building and was walking home, as you do, you think back, you have a memory, right? And you think back on that thing. And I thought back on it and I had a memory from my life and it was animated, right? And when I watch The Simpsons, I don't have an animated memory of my life. I just have a memory of watching something on a screen. And so you can just sort of start to extrapolate from that, right? So if people make horror games where you're attacked by a zombie, then that person then has a memory of being attacked by a zombie, and being attacked by anyone like sits with you differently than if you watch someone being attacked on a screen. And so if we're not careful, we can create trauma, we can create bad memories, we can induce fear, but we also have the power to do the exact opposite, right? There's a reason that I've leaned really heavily into comedy. Some people think it's frivolous and unimportant. It's so important because even just watching a sitcom makes people feel better. I have a friend who's a pediatric cardiologist, and she always says, and I'm like, oh my God, you do such amazing work. And she's like, no, you do the work that allows me to do my job, because I come home at the end of the day after working with sick children and I turn on a TV show, and it helps me feel better and get through my day. And that's the thing, it's like, it does make you feel better. You watch 22 minutes of a show and you feel better afterwards. And like I was saying, XR has a greater impact. I think it's been measured up to like 30% more impact. And so if you can make people feel better with a flat screen, you can make them feel 30% better if you tell a positive and uplifting story in an immersive environment. And I think it's just so important that creators are aware of that, because people behave in the world based on how they've been treated and based on the experiences they've had, right? Like if somebody, at the coffee shop snaps at you, then like you might be grumpy when you encounter the next person. But if someone like wishes you a good morning, like I think there's some really lame commercial on TV about that, like people doing little acts of kindness and then they pass it along, right? But we really can impact how people feel and how they behave in the world. So it's a great power to be a creator in XR, and with that comes great responsibility. So I hope that through this talk, I'm helping you guys do your job better, but I'm also happy to be in contact with you beyond this, to make sure that we're putting good work into the world. So yeah, questions. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you so much for this talk. I think breaking down your work and elements of what you teach to your students, as we talked about on our one-on-one, when was that, last week?
It's been a long week.
Time isn't real anymore. But when we talked on our one-on-one, and you were talking about sort of breaking down work from your last book and work on your next book, and the things that you really want to impart about story structure from a very technical angle into how that plays out in everyday content that we experience, whether it's a sitcom like Friends or it's new media like what you're doing with business, I think is crucial here. And we have a wide range of projects, as you saw in the participant bios, from more abstract narratives and from very traditional games to XR experience that are meant to be very interactive and you move through them. And knowing that, are there any references for writing, not necessarily just for comedy or for traditional narrative structures, that you would recommend to our participants that they could glean knowledge from?
Yes. I mean, Yes.
I know you listed a few pieces that I wrote down.
I mean, so for TV writing, I really love Ellen Sandler's The TV Writer's Workbook. And I feel like through that, even though it's focused on television writing, you just learn a lot about story. For character development, I'm a big fan of Scott Sedita's The 8 Characters of Comedy. And then, I mean, it's less about writing, but it was really interesting about Jane McGonigal's Reality is Broken. Then actually, if you're interested in that taxonomy that I pointed out, or in learning more about the business or any other XR stuff, this book is huge and heavy, but the global impacts and roles of immersive media is an amazing compilation edited by Jackie Morey and Kate McCallum. And Jackie's been in VR for ages, like ages. And she's even like invented a scent collar so you can like smell in virtual reality. It's crazy what she's done. And so they had each chapter, I have 2 chapters, but everyone else has 1 chapter. And they each wrote about like their specialty. So there's a chapter on LBE, there's a chapter on mise en scène, there's just like immersive media production and creation. So each chapter is super valuable and talks about, and very current, like they rushed this book. We did it in like less than a year. So these are people who are experts in the field now talking about what they're doing now and where the industry is at. And that's, it's available in the hardcover book, but it's also available chapter by chapter online. So you could just buy individual chapters if you're interested in something specific. And then I put,
what is the name of the book again?
Which one? The really long one?
I think Cami.
Here, you know what I'll do is I think I'll put my website link in the chat, and then that should have a link to it. That's what I'll do. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the resources that Eve was talking about, I've written down in my notes and we'll share.
And if you follow me on LinkedIn, like I will actually be summarizing a lot of the key concepts from these resources in the book that I have coming out next year. And I think I mentioned some of them because I do have a chapter in my book, the 10 kick-ass careers for storytellers. That's the one that's out now on Amazon. And so I have a chapter where I talk about virtual reality storytelling, and I mention the taxonomy. So I think I referenced some of these resources there, but I will go into greater depth in the next book, which is coming out next year. But here is, let me see, upcoming events.
I have another.
I'm just going to put this link in the chat. So this is it links to my past events, but that basically includes previous talks. So there's the original talk I gave at Augmented World Expo about the taxonomy is in this list, but if you scroll down, there's also a talk I did with all the book authors. And so the book name is also on this list. So if you scroll down, you'll see the book name.
Another quick question for you before our time is up, and if anyone else has a question, feel free to jump in. But something I think that would be really relevant to this group, how do you make someone care about your story? And again, knowing there's a wide range of stories being told by our participants, what are some, very high level pieces of advice to get people to care about understanding where that story is going to lead them, or why they should even read or play through it? I know it's a good question.
I mean, that gets at the why, like I think which I spoke about a little bit in my talk. I mean, character is a great way to do that. If you can get your audience invested in your character, but I think the question of why is at the heart of that, right? Why do you care about this character? Why, if it's a story, the character has a goal, right? And so why do you care about that character achieving that goal or not, right? So there's stakes involved. Like, what does it mean to that character? So it's like it's a double layered thing, right? It's like you have to first, well, I don't know which comes first, which comes second, but you have to care about that character in order to care about whether they get their goal, right? So you have to understand why that goal is important to your character but you also have to care about your character, because if you don't, then you're not going to care whether they achieve their goal. And it's similar in game, right? In game, you're the character. So you have a goal and you have to understand why you care about that goal. Otherwise, you're not going to want to play the game. So that's a very short, a very short explanation. You know, I can go into greater depth, but that's kind of the quick fix version. I think why is really important. And there's another thing that Ellen Sandler says in her book, which is super valuable, which is this idea of a lot of times people write in their development materials, and I saw it a few times in the presentation you sent me, that the character must do this, is forced to do that, you know, or you must do this. And that is very common language for selling products, right? For marketing. And it sends a clear, strong message to the listener or reader. It's not as helpful of language for a writer or storyteller. So I write a different version of it for me as I'm developing my story, because if someone is forced to do something, then you don't understand why they're doing it. First of all, no one is ever forced to do anything. If someone puts a gun to your head, you still have a choice. It's not a great choice. You don't have great options, but you can make different choices, right? You could choose to kick the assailant. You could choose to run away. You could choose to give them your wallet. Like, some are better than others, but whatever you do is a choice. Even if you just choose to like freeze and panic, right? Like, it's a choice. And the way that we learn about characters, the way that we understand character, is through their choices. People are the accumulation of their choices. That is what character is. And so if you use language like forced or must, you're not just robbing the character of a choice, but you're robbing yourself as a writer of the character being able to make a choice. And when you do that, we're losing an opportunity to learn about that character, and learning about them, understanding them, is what makes us care about them. Back to your previous question, right? So if you can ask yourself, yeah, okay, you must do this to win the game, but why are you choosing to? Because you could also walk away from the game, right? Like, it's not, yeah, you must to win the game, but you also don't really have to. And there've been plenty of times I've put on a VR headset and then been like, like, I don't want to be here. Right. But there are other times, like I played, there are plenty of times I put on a headset and it's been like a shooting game or something that I just didn't love, and I didn't understand why I was doing it. I didn't care. And I've taken off the headset. But the game like Job Simulator, which I think is really fantastic. If you haven't played it, go play it. I was having a blast. Like, even when I got stuck, there was a point where I really got stuck in the game and I thought it might be a glitch. And I was like, maybe I should just give up. Maybe I'm going to be stuck here. I was having so much fun in the game that I understood why I wanted to stick around, right? I understood from a story point of view why I needed to shred this money if the company was not on the up and up. But I also understood as an audience member why, because I knew the next thing was going to be fun. Like, I knew it was going to pay off. And so I was incentivized to stick around because I cared. But just saying that like, if you're developing that game and you say, oh, you must do this, it's like, well, they mustn't. That's not true. Why do they want to? Why do they want to do it? And I think if you could get at that, like, that really serves creators.
Thank you. And I understand your points being very sensitive to language. And I think a lot of the projects that everyone here is developing have a lot to do actually with free will and how you move in space and how you let the story evolve. Because there are not many pieces here where the story is simply happening to you. You, of course, because many of the projects here do have some mixed reality component, you have to engage in a way. You have to choose whether or not you're moving ahead. And I think it's just a very interesting point you make about writing. I know there was another question in the chat.
Yeah, maybe I can.
How many writing?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you how many people, writing people, work on the same project with you, and how it works together. I don't know.
That's a great question. So, I mean, I've done a wide variety of work and it's different in different settings. So when I was working on TV sitcoms, for example, the rooms would be anywhere from 5 to 10 people. And the way that that would work. So this is actually detailed in the book, 10 Kick-Ass Careers for Storytellers, if it's of greater interest, but I'll give you a quick overview, is like basically all the writers would sit around a table in like a conference room and be there all day and brainstorm stories together and then beat them out, meaning what happens first, next, you know, kind of go through it. And then they would assign, like, so once they have the beats of the story from start to end of an episode, then they would send one writer off to write the outline. And that writer would then bring it back to the group, which would read it and give feedback. And then they would revise the outline and then they would go off and write the script. For something like The Biz Nest, I wrote that all myself. It would have been lovely to have a room, but you know, you're creating and innovating in a new space. So I wrote that all myself. And then I do, you know, I've done like, you know, movie scripts on my own and a novel on my own. But I also work with an XR directing partner these days. And we get hired by corporate entities to create immersive experiences for brands and companies. And so we had a process, we did something for a really cool like sensory tech company in the spring, and they needed an immersive experience. And so we collaborated over Zoom and we would sort of brainstorm the story together and then sort of start to put it in a deck. And then we each have sort of different specialties. So once we have it, we have agreed on the concept and we have the basic parts down, then we could kind of each do a review pass on our own of like, you know, I'm great with language. So I'll do like a pass kind of fixing the language and like tidying it up. And she's really good with visuals. So she would do a pass, like getting visuals to support the story. So, you know, I think different collaborators work differently, but that's how we did it. We would kind of talk it through together until we landed on the core elements of story, sort of a mini version of that writer's room, right? It was just 2 of us instead of 10 of us. And then we would kind of put it in deck format for the clients, as opposed to outline formats for TV executives. Trying to think if there are any other, yeah, those are kind of the main ways that I collaborate with other writers.
Thank you for this. I think we are at time,
okay,
given the schedule pushed a little bit today, but do you have any final thoughts for this group, or does anyone have any final question or comment? Awesome. Yeah, do you have any final thought?
No, I think I covered, I'm trying to think, I think I covered it all. I'm trying to think if anything else jumps out at me.
Yes, I hope this helped with maybe the table of contents for the next piece.
Thanks. Well, and on that note, I'll put in the chat this is the link to the current ebook on Amazon and if you want that. So I think paperback should be out soon, but the ebook is out now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, I'll put the Look Club, in the chat.
Thank you.
I think that's it. Thank you guys for being a great audience. I really hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Awesome. So we have done our 3 sessions for today. We have about 15 minutes left. I wanted to go back to the original prompt I mentioned on the break about stories that have impacted you. And based on the sessions that we went through today, we can take a moment to process. I know it's a lot. You know, talking about what some of those were and why they did have impact, especially now based on what you've learned from our 3 speakers. Is there anyone who wants to share a little bit about that?
Perhaps for my part, I was how to say that today we see two kind of experience. Some storytelling, some narrative experience like gaming, and some VR gaming.
Mm-hmm.
With are more gaming than experience, you know, like the tree. The example of the tree is just an experience. I didn't see a storytelling in that. I know there is, but I don't know where to place the frontier between a narrative work or an experience work. So for me, it's difficult to tell.
Sure.
It's not really a question, but it's an interrogation about this frontier. How to tell a story when you just want to share an experience.
Tree is interesting. I can share my own. Has anyone else done Tree? Because it's been shown internationally. Okay. So I've experienced Tree when I produced that exhibition it was in, and it's a very interesting piece because it has some elements of voiceover, but for the most part, the way in which you are experiencing it, to what Malizia said today, is that you are the tree. So you wake up, or not wake up, but basically like your eyes open and you're not a person in the experience. It's a first person perspective of a tree.
Yeah.
So you start under the ground and then you grow up and you are like the entire experience, you're just slowly getting taller. That's pretty much it. And if you look out, you'll see that your arms are branches that you can move. So it establishes very quickly that you are a tree. You realize this. And I'm going to spoil the experience. I forget if she brought this up, but as you grow up, you see little animals around you and other plants, and you have this symbiotic relationship to nature. But then at the very end, because you're a tree, you can't go anywhere. You see your entire forest burn and you realize you're going to burn alive. And it's very emotional because you're not engaging really with other characters. You can't really talk. It's not like you're moving around. You're stationary the entire time. But through design, you realize what character you're playing and that it's your perspective. And then the experience pretty much ends right before you're set on fire and you realize you're going to die. And it's so emotional because when you come out of it, you realize the issues with deforestation, environmentalism, climate change. And it has you, the story has you become something that you never could experience. We are not trees. We are not, that is not the role we play in life. But at the same time, it's so impactful because it is that first person perspective. And because you're watching others like you, you're seeing a whole forest burn. So when you're thinking about your stories and story development, an example like Tree is extremely abstract, but also incredibly literal. It is both at the same time. And although all of you have, you know, character and storyline at a very high level at this point, in what ways could you get a player to either empathize, or if you're doing a social impact piece, where in the world does your character fit that you can immediately help them establish the role that they are playing? You know, if you drop someone into a world, which is the reality of a lot of game and immersive experiences, what are you doing to help them understand the rules of that world, the consequences of that world, and how they're supposed to engage from the onset? Are their arms tree branches? How do you get them to understand who they are? So these are story and character design elements. Does that all make sense? I want to make sure. Does anyone have questions on that?
I didn't know there was a voiceover. Yes, it's a voiceover.
I'm forgetting if it's a voiceover, or I think there might just be text at the beginning that tells you, like, you're a seed, something like that. Yeah.
Because I'm very interested by the force of the image, and I would like to make some projects where only the picture is telling the story, and only the gameplay in the.
Have you seen VR?
Sorry.
Pardon?
I was wondering if Mani has seen a film called Gravity VR.
Yeah, I wanted to tell the
the
same.
film.
Because it's an animation in VR and there is no voice, and it's all told through the images, and there's also an interesting point of view trick. So I think you might be very interested in seeing that.
By the way, Mani, do you have a headset, a VR headset at home?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
So
Christmas is coming, so perhaps.
No problem. Maybe I can share it with you as I'm in Paris, and I can maybe give you 1 hour or either like morning.
Or in New York,
Or in New York, yes.
Some sessions.
Of course, there are plenty of narrative experience to discover, of course.
And
so
perhaps, just
I will. Oh, sorry. Was someone talking?
Really quickly.
Oh yeah.
Besides VR, and I haven't seen Tree, but I feel like storytelling sometimes isn't just first degree narration. Like you do not need in a game to have something like once upon a time there was a guy and blah 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 an exhibition. Even if there's no text or a narrator in Tree, I feel like the gameplay and the ambience and the lights and the colors tells a lot about the story actually, without having the need to describe everything. And even in Tree, if I understand well, you don't have a lot of gameplay, you just watch. And the fact of making the player unable to resist and fight the fire makes it even more powerful than just having a narrator saying, and then the fire will burn everything to the ground. You just see that and you are the tree. The gameplay makes you be the tree and be unable and weak and unable to do anything. I think it's even stronger than words.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's also something really important here. I'm going to pause just for 1 second. Knowing that we're close to time and that some people have schedule conflicts and stuff like that, we can stay on this topic. I want our program to have flexibility to, of course, meet everyone's needs. So we can continue to stay on this topic. We can switch, as I was saying, we can go through Joy's project and discuss, oh my God, it's snowing outside. I'm sorry. I'm just very upset. I just looked out the window and it's snowing. This is,
so cute.
Sorry, my studio windows are here. I know we're going to go through Joy's project, but we could also do that tomorrow if this is more relevant. So you guys tell me, what is more helpful? Staying on this because there's a discussion, or jumping and doing a project review?
The discussion is interesting.
Okay, let's stay on the discussion then. I was just looking at the chat to see if there's feedback. So in terms of story writing, I think it is so helpful knowing that there is a desire from this group to have kind of a writer's room. I think Benjamin brought that up yesterday, and doing that while we're together in New York. Even if, to Melanie's point, and also to Melanie's point, that your player or user, whomever is experiencing your piece, is establishing their role in real time without text, without a voiceover, without some, very clear and direct way of unfolding that, I still think that there is a need to script out or write out the plot of your experience. Because even if you're not literally using that in the experience itself, it's going to help any collaborators you have. It's going to help in design, because you'll start saying like, you need to let people know this is a scary, dark place. Instead of saying that literally, how do you design it? So I think that maybe a big need here for this group is that we actually do write it out, or we do do you know what story beats are? You've referenced it. I'm sure that there's a French word for it. Story beats, and I think we should do this in New York together, and we can start doing it this week. Story beats are where you write out what happens each step of the way. So it's not necessarily incredibly detailed, but it's going like, the character starts here. If the character goes left, what happens? If the character goes right, what happens? The character engages in this way. Or let's use Manny's, for example, because you can play between two characters. When you're this character, if you get to this level, you do this. If you're this character at the same level, this other thing will happen. how do you fit that together to not only communicate it to your audience, communicate to your collaborators, but then also make a summary of the project that's sellable, whether you're doing it to festivals or you're marketing, whatever. So I think that we should really be thinking about going all the way back to the beginning of this with the prompt. Cami, what is the link that you just posted?
It's a new repertoire by a French institute about narrative VR experience, just to have a list.
Awesome, thank you. I think as we talk about stories and their impact, it's understanding that beginning, middle, and end, and how someone gets through the story and what are the consequences, why should they continue, coming up with that. And maybe for tomorrow, each of you don't have to spend tons of time on this, maybe just think about it, but this is something in journalism, establishing why a story matters. It's who, what, where, when, why, and how. And thinking about all of those things in relation to your story. And maybe actually that can be the prompt for tomorrow morning, just sort of writing out a very short one line of each of those questions. So something to think about now, and we'll spend 10-15 minutes on that tomorrow before we start our first session. Are there any other questions about story and narrative formatting from today or impact? Yes.
I just want to ask because Eve talk about the trauma, our responsibility about the story and the emotions we improve. We want to the player feel, and it was a good question because she talked about trauma or other things or other emotions, because we don't know how the player can I don't know how to say. I don't know the feeling of the player before. We have to test, of course, but maybe we can have some theme a little bit touchy, or I don't know. And I think it's interesting to know or to have a reflection on this this kind of narrative way. I don't know if you understand what I said.
I think I do. And in wanting to hopefully answer this correctly, Eve, as she established, is a comedy writer, and comedy is her great love. And she's focused a lot of her work around writing comedy for different age groups. She mentioned children's shows she's worked on. She's mentioned more adult focused shows that she's also written for. I don't think her intention was to say everyone should do comedy. I think it was to say, consider the mindset of your players, and really think about where they're coming from and what you want to share with them. And so, for example, knowing that several people in this group are doing darker, slightly disturbing plot lines, that's fine. That's absolutely okay. It's making sure you're establishing why that matters and why someone should experience this. That is one of the many types of experiences that people can have. So why should they choose that for themselves? You could say someone likes horror games or horror films, for example, to go on the opposite, I guess, of comedy. Well, maybe comedy would be sadness, but say someone enjoys horror, why in particular would they go through this experience? What new thing can you bring to them? Or if it's a narrative, not even a game, but a narrative experience on a different side of the stories here that are being told. what is it that you want them to walk out of considering and thinking about? What is it that you want to impart to them? Is it something they've never thought of? Is it trying to drill deeper into a certain thought or experience? Is it experiencing something in a totally new way, such as a city? I'm thinking of Antoine's piece, you know, going into spaces that we're overlaying new stories and emotions about. Eve also brought up making memories, new memories in digital spaces. What consequence does that have? And not every piece, to Malitzia's presentation and Eve's presentation, has to have social impact. That being said, though, also to Malitzia's point this morning, there are a lot of groups in the US who are interested in funding social impact narratives, and there's success here if you're focused on something related to minorities or to environmentalism, climate change. So if you can fit your story into those, there's a higher chance of funding here. Yeah, not saying change it. I'm just saying figure out a fun marketing way to fit your story there so you can get funding.
Thank you.
Sure. I know we're almost at time. Any other questions about this stuff today? No? Fantastic. Let me ask this too, as programmers for this. Were these talks beneficial? Were they helpful? I know not all of them were applicable to every project, but we're trying to have these professionals come in and inspire or share new insight.
I feel like it's still interesting to have people from sides that I wouldn't expect and that aren't necessarily really goal to what we want to achieve. I think it's interesting to have people from every aspect. I said it in the chat, but like, I don't have a lot of interest for comedy, but I feel like the last intervention, when she explained her practice, was really interesting, the way she defended it and how she thought about her practice. So I think it was fine.
Okay, great. This feedback is helpful for us. Any other? What were you saying?
I was saying, what about you guys?
Yes, for me, it's very, very interesting. I just shy at the beginning, but I promise in next days I will speak more. But there is a lot of point of view from different horizon. So for me, with a newbie, as I said, it's very, very, very interesting for now.
Also, I want to ask, oh, go ahead. Someone?
Sorry, I remain behind money, but I completely agree with Melanie and other domains, other studies with this opinion. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Another question I have, all of you, of course, speak English perfectly. And that to say, though, I know some of our English first and only speakers speak quite fast. So I've asked everyone, of course, to be conscious that this is a program in possibly your second language. So is anyone speaking too fast or anything like that? I want to make sure that nothing's getting lost from their end. Okay, so thank you. And of course, please know that if there's any like term, because I know some of this stuff is getting technical, but if there are any terms that you're familiar with, Cami is our wonderful translator for anything in the program, because we'd rather you ask and just to make sure, because we don't want our speakers to move too quickly through a topic that might be relevant to you, just because French is not their first language. And we do have some French speakers who will give their talks in English, but a few people from Lebanon, and hopefully they can briefly address you in your language. Thank you for speaking ours. Thinking of any other points for tomorrow? I think it would be. Oh, go ahead.
I have just a question about the pitch you wanted we work on. Do you want we present a new pitch, shorter, or you just want to work on a presentation from yesterday?
So great question. Based on doing that, we can spend, and we were going to do it today, but I think this is more valuable. So moving forward tomorrow to Friday, we'll try to take maybe 10 minutes to go through projects, because between December, the rest of this month, and January, our hopes, and we'll talk more about this on Friday, our hopes are that all of you work on your projects before you get to New York City, whatever that looks like, whatever you have the ability to do, given you the other professional work you're doing, funding, etc. But whether that's coming up with some form of prototype or making your deck stronger, you're going to be in front of people who potentially could help fund you in New York City, studios that might want to work with you, and different collaborators that you might be able to also partner with. So we want to make sure when you come in February that you have those resources to start connecting and networking with people here. But we will also work on that with you in February. I think looking out a few months, the best way that you can think of your workshops when you arrive in New York, it's about your story as creators and marketing yourself and talking about yourself to your potential audience or to collaborators. Also your story. So writing out and being very clear about the story you're trying to tell with your work. So all of it is about storytelling. And in terms of the decks coming up, you don't have to panic and go work on that too much, but taking in feedback about certain pieces of information like production timelines, festivals that you want to apply to, other residencies you're looking at or maybe are part of now that would help benefit you, especially coming into an American market. Does that all make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Awesome. So I think that we should wrap for today. And if anyone has side questions or something comes up, just feel free to reach out to Cami and myself. And I will officially start posting in the Discord after this. I've been so busy yesterday. So thank you. And great to see you all, and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you. See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.